Hi mathematicians, for each of these problems you can feel free to click on the link that I've provided right here that takes you to your own virtual board where you would just need to file and make yourself a copy. But just for the sake of time, instead of going through, doing this part myself, I'm just going to draw the picture right next to the problem. So problem number 1, it is saying that you've got a positive 4 and that you're adding a negative 5. So that means I would have 4 positives, and then I would add that to 5 negatives. So what happens when those positives and those negatives combine? So you've got a positive and a negative that would cancel each other out, just like so. Or you can think about it this way, where you would have 1, 2, 3, 4 positives, 2, 3, 4, 5 negatives. You could say those 4 positives will cancel out 4 of those negatives, and that leaves, after those have all canceled each other out, that will leave just that 1 negative left over after all these guys have canceled each other out. So positive 4 plus a negative 5, you're just going to type negative 1 right there in the answer box, because after you get done combining everything that cancels, you're going to have 1 negative left over. Okay, for problem number 2, I would have 6 positives. So which I'm adding to 6 negatives. So what's going to happen? Well, you have 6 positives and 6 negatives, so you have exactly the same number of positives and negatives. So each of those will cancel each other out. There isn't anything left over, right? So negative 6 plus a positive 6, or I guess I should say positive 6 plus a negative 6 is going to be equal to 0. So just type 0 right there in the answer box. And for the last one, we would have 9 positives. And then we would be combining them with 4 negatives. So these 4 negatives will cancel out 4 of those positives. And what is going to be left over? We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 positives. So positive 9 plus negative 4 is going to give you a positive 5. So the big idea whenever you are adding 2 numbers together that don't have the same sign, instead of adding them together, you're basically finding out the difference between them. You're figuring out, like, between 4 and 5, what is going to be the difference? How much would be left over? So in other words, 5 minus 4 would be 1. So the first step is whenever you are combining 2 numbers that have opposite signs, the first thing you're going to do is subtract them, because you need to figure out, for example, if I have 4 positives and I have 5 negatives, like, how many are going to be left over, right? So the first thing you need to do is subtract to figure out how many are left over. So in this case, it would be a negative 1. And then the sign of your answer. So step 1, we're going to subtract. Step 2, the sign is, and this is a very unmathy way to say it, how many you have more of. So what I mean by that, in this case, because you have 5 negatives, but you only had 4 positives, in this case, your answer would be negative, right? But if you go down to problem number 2, you have exactly the same number of positives and negatives. 6 minus 6 is going to be 0. You don't attach a sign to it because you had the same number of positives and negatives. And then last but not least, here in the third one, you had more positives than you did negatives. So that is why your final sum turned out to be a positive.